The sleek black Bentley glided through the bustling streets of Manhattan, its polished surface reflecting the golden hues of a setting sun. Inside, Michael Lancaster, one of the city's most powerful and ruthless businessmen, sat with a carefully neutral expression, his sharp blue eyes fixed on the screen of his phone. With a flick of his thumb, he dismissed yet another multimillion-dollar deal, trivial, forgettable. He had bigger ambitions. Michael Lancaster was not a man easily shocked. After all, he'd seen it all: power, betrayal, and the ruthless climb to the top of the financial empire his family had once crumbled. At 38, he was as unattached to the world emotionally as he was attached to his work. A self-proclaimed realist, Michael believed life was a series of transactions, nothing more. But life has a way of shocking even those who think they've mastered its rules. As his car slowed near an intersection on Fifth Avenue, something caught Michael's eye. A fleeting glimpse of 4 small figures sitting on the curbside under the neon glow of a nearby diner. He would have ignored it like he ignored most of the world outside the window of his luxury car. But there was something off. Something that made his heart stutter in a way it hadn't since he was a boy. "Stop the car," he said abruptly, his voice low but commanding. The driver, Charles, shot a quick glance through the rearview mirror. "Sir, I said stop the car." Michael's tone left no room for argument. The Bentley rolled to a halt, a line of irritated horns blaring behind them. Ignoring it all, Michael unbuckled his seatbelt and stepped out onto the sidewalk. For a moment, the usual din of the city seemed to fall away. The only thing that mattered were the 4 figures sitting by the diner's entrance. 2 boys, 2 girls. Ragged clothes hung off their thin shoulders, and their faces were streaked with the kind of grime that spoke of days, if not weeks, on the streets. They looked cold, lost, alone. Yet, none of that is what rooted Michael to the spot, his breath catching in his chest like he'd been sucker punched. It was their faces. The boy closest to him lifted his chin, his piercing blue eyes locking with Michael's. Eyes that mirrored Michael's own so perfectly it was like staring into a smaller version of himself. The shock of recognition hit him like a tidal wave. Michael's gaze darted between the children, his mind whirring. The eldest girl, perhaps 11, had long chestnut hair and a determined expression, her jawline unervingly similar to his late mother's. One of the younger boys, around 9, stood slightly behind her, cautious but curious, his face an exact replica of Michael's childhood photographs. The other girl, no older than 6, clutched a threadbare stuffed animal, her small features impossibly familiar, as though etched from his very bloodline. And then there was the youngest boy, a toddler no more than 3, who stumbled to his feet, his wide blue eyes staring up at Michael with innocent confusion. Michael froze, his pulse thundering in his ears. It was impossible. Impossible. Yet here they were, these children, strangers on a street corner who looked exactly like him. His voice, when he finally spoke, sounded hoarse and unsteady. Who are you?" The eldest girl stepped forward, her chin raised defiantly despite the fear flickering in her eyes. "You don't know us?" "No," Michael murmured, shaking his head. "I don't." The girl glared at him with a mixture of resentment and something else, hurt. "You should," she said, her voice soft but pointed. "You're our father." The words hit Michael like a freight train, leaving him reeling. "What did you say?" "You heard me," she snapped, tears pooling in her eyes despite her attempt at bravery. "You're our father. You left us. You're rich and we're—" She stopped, unable to finish. Michael took a shaky step backward, his world tilting dangerously. His mind scrambled for answers, for logic, for anything that could explain what he was seeing. He had no children, none that he knew of. He'd been careful his entire life. Relationships had always been transactional, fleeting. This couldn't be real. "Listen," he began, his voice unusually gentle as he crouched slightly to meet the girl's eye level. "There must be some mistake. I've never seen you before. Who told you this?" The boy with his face, the one standing behind the eldest girl, spoke up this time, his voice a whisper. Mama told us before she... He stopped, swallowing hard. Before she went away. Michael's heart slammed against his ribcage. Where is your mother? She's gone, the girl said coldly. We've been on our own for weeks now. She told us if anything happened to her, we'd find you. That you'd help us. Help. Michael Lancaster was not a man who helped anyone. It wasn't in his nature. Yet as he looked at the 4 children, thin, trembling, and alone, something unfamiliar began to stir inside him. He couldn't name it, but it clawed at him, refusing to let go. Before Michael could respond, Charles appeared at his side, looking flustered. Sir, is there a problem? Michael glanced at the children, then back at Charles. Take them to the car, he said quietly. Charles frowned. Sir, just do it, Michael snapped, his voice regaining its familiar edge. The ride back to Michael's penthouse was a surreal blur. The 4 children sat silently in the back of the Bentley, clutching each other as though afraid they might be torn apart. Michael sat in the passenger seat, his mind racing with 1,000 unanswered questions. When they arrived at his gleaming high-rise, the children stared up at the towering building with wide, wary eyes. Michael led them inside, his footsteps echoing through the marble lobby as he ushered them into the private elevator. The eldest girl, clearly the leader, was the first to speak once they were inside the penthouse. Why are we here? Because I need answers, Michael said curtly. He turned to face her, his sharp gaze softening slightly. And because you can't stay out there. We don't need your charity, she shot back, her tone venomous. It's not charity, Michael replied, surprising himself with the softness in his voice. It's temporary. The girl crossed her arms, her face a mask of skepticism. Mama said you wouldn't want us. Michael flinched. What else did your mother tell you? She told us you were powerful. The boy whispered, his voice trembling. That you didn't know about us, but if you ever found out, you'd... He hesitated, as if unsure whether to continue. I'd what? Michael pressed. The boy looked up, his eyes full of something that made Michael's chest tighten. Hope. That you'd save us. Michael spent the rest of the night staring out the floor-to-ceiling windows of his penthouse, a glass of untouched whiskey in his hand. Behind him, the children slept on the massive sectional sofa, curled up under soft blankets his housekeeper had brought in a hurry. Save us, the boy had said. But Michael Lancaster wasn't a savior. He was a businessman, a man who didn't believe in miracles or fate or family. Yet somehow, for children with his eyes were sleeping in his home and his life, his carefully controlled, meticulously constructed life was unraveling. As dawn began to creep over the horizon, Michael made a decision that would change everything. He needed to know the truth. Who was their mother? Where had they come from? And how on earth were they his? The morning sunlight crept through the floor-to-ceiling windows of Michael Lancaster's penthouse, casting a golden glow across the otherwise sterile space. The 4 children slept soundly on the oversized sectional sofa, their small bodies curled beneath plush blankets. To Michael, it was a surreal sight. This was a home built for a solitary man, a fortress of steel and glass where warmth had no place. And yet, their presence somehow made the space feel alive. Michael hadn't slept. His mind was a relentless storm of questions, none of which he could answer. How could these children look exactly like him? Who was their mother and what had happened to her? At precisely 7 a.m., the elevator chimed softly, and Charles, his driver and longtime assistant, entered with 2 steaming cups of coffee. He paused, glancing at the children still asleep, and raised an eyebrow. They're still here, Charles asked, handing Michael the coffee. Yes, Michael replied tersely, his eyes never leaving the children. I need you to find out everything you can about their mother. I want a name, an address, anything. Charles hesitated. And if there's nothing to find? There's always something to find, Michael said sharply. Get it done. The children awoke one by one, disoriented and unsure of where they were. The eldest girl, who Michael had learned was named Emma, was the first to sit up, her protective instincts immediately kicking in. She shot a glare at Michael, who sat at the dining table, sipping his coffee and scrolling through his phone. "Where are we?" she demanded. Michael looked up, unfazed by her tone. "Somewhere safe. You'll stay here until I figure out what's going on." "We don't need your help," Emma snapped, pulling the youngest boy, Jacob, into her lap as he rubbed sleep from his eyes. Michael set down his coffee, his expression calm but firm. "You were living on the streets. You don't have a choice." Emma opened her mouth to argue, but the younger girl, Lily, tugged on her sister's sleeve. "I'm hungry," she murmured, her voice soft. Michael pressed a button on his phone, summoning his housekeeper, Elena, who appeared within minutes. "Take care of their breakfast," he instructed, standing abruptly. Emma glared after him as he strode toward his office, muttering under her breath. "Rich people think they can fix everything with money." Inside his office, Michael paced the room, his thoughts a tangled mess. His phone buzzed. "Charles." "I have something," Charles said. The children's mother was a woman named Sarah Carter. Michael froze. The name hit him like a sledgehammer. "Sarah Carter. You knew her?" Michael sank into his leather chair, memories rushing back with the force of a tidal wave. Sarah. It had been over a decade since he had last seen her. She was the first woman he had ever truly cared for, back when he was a young man trying to build his fortune. She was kind, full of life, and far too good for the man he had been back then. Arrogant, reckless, and too focused on his ambitions. But he remembered the last time he saw her vividly. They had fought. She'd wanted more, commitment, a future. He couldn't give her that. "I'm not that man," he'd told her, his words cold and final. She had walked out of his life that night, and he'd convinced himself it was for the best. "Sir." Charles's voice pulled him back to the present. "Where is she now?" Michael asked, though he wasn't sure he wanted the answer. There was a long pause on the other end. "She's dead, sir. Passed away 2 weeks ago. Heart failure, from what I could gather." Michael's chest constricted. "And the children?" "Left on their own," Charles said. "She had no other family, no one to take them in. It explains why they were on the street." Michael pinched the bridge of his nose, guilt pressing down on him like a lead weight. Sarah was gone. And these children, her children, were his. "How sure are we that they're mine?" he asked quietly. "I took the liberty of arranging a paternity test," Charles replied. "But, sir, you've seen them. There's no doubt." Michael ended the call and stared out the window at the city below. He had spent years building an empire, fortifying himself against the world, but nothing had prepared him for this. For children, his children, who had spent weeks fighting to survive while he sat in a penthouse worth millions. For the first time in years, Michael Lancaster felt like a failure. That afternoon, Michael returned to the living room, where Elena was clearing away empty breakfast plates. The children were gathered near the windows, staring in awe at the view of the city. "Where did you say your mother told you to find me?" Michael asked, directing the question at Emma. Emma turned, her expression guarded. "She didn't say where exactly, just that you were rich and lived in a big building. We've been looking for weeks." Michael sighed, running a hand through his hair. "Why didn't she tell me about you?" Emma's eyes darkened. "She said you didn't want us." The words cut deeper than Michael expected. "She was wrong." Emma narrowed her eyes. Was she? Michael had no answer for that. Over the next few days, the children remained at the penthouse as Michael wrestled with what to do next. He hired Elena to stay on full-time to care for them, though Emma continued to insist they didn't need his help. Michael, however, couldn't ignore them, not anymore. Jacob followed him around the apartment like a shadow, and Lily would often sit beside him quietly, drawing pictures of the family she'd never had. Even Emma, despite her tough exterior, began to soften, her walls slowly coming down. But it was the second boy, Ethan, who worried Michael the most. The child barely spoke, his eyes constantly darting around as if expecting the world to fall apart at any moment. Michael saw too much of himself in Ethan. The loneliness, the distrust, the walls built to protect a fragile heart. One evening, as Michael sat in his office reviewing the paternity results that confirmed what he already knew, Emma entered quietly. "What happens now?" she asked, her voice small. Michael set the papers aside and looked at her. "What do you mean? Are you going to send us away?" The question took him aback. "No," he said firmly. "You'll stay here." Emma studied him carefully, as if trying to decide whether or not to believe him. "Why do you care now?" Michael sighed, his voice uncharacteristically gentle. "Because I made a mistake, and I don't want to make another one." For the first time, Emma's face softened. "Mama said you'd save us," she whispered. Michael's chest tightened. He wasn't a savior. He wasn't even a good man. But as he looked at the girl standing before him, carrying the weight of the world on her small shoulders, he made a silent promise to her and to Sarah. "I will," he said quietly. "I'll protect you." Emma nodded once, her expression resolute. "Good, because we don't have anyone else." Michael Lancaster sat at the edge of his office desk, staring at the sleek folder containing the paternity results. The words 99.99% match burned into his mind, as though mocking him for his past ignorance. They were his children, Emma, Ethan, Lily, and Jacob. There was no escaping the truth now. As Michael closed the folder, a soft knock on the office door pulled him from his thoughts. Emma peeked her head in, her expression guarded as always. "Dinner's ready," she muttered, her tone a mix of defiance and reluctant acceptance. Michael nodded. "I'll be there in a minute." Emma hesitated, her fingers tightening on the edge of the door. "You don't have to sit with us if you're busy," she said, almost like a challenge. Michael met her gaze. "I said I'll be there." Her walls cracked for a fraction of a second, surprise flickering across her face. Then, she nodded and disappeared down the hallway. Dinner was quiet. The long dining table, designed for hosting wealthy investors and high-profile guests, felt far too grand with just 5 people. The twins, Lily and Jacob, ate hungrily, their manners still rough around the edges. Emma silently pushed her food around on the plate, stealing glances at Michael every now and then. Ethan, as usual, barely touched his meal. Michael watched them, unsure how to navigate this strange new reality. He had commanded boardrooms, negotiated billion-dollar deals, and stared down ruthless tycoons. Yet here, with 4 small children who shared his blood, he felt utterly powerless. "I don't like vegetables," Jacob declared suddenly, shoving his broccoli to the side. Michael's lips quirked upward in the faintest smile. "No one does, but you eat them anyway." Jacob stared at him wide-eyed, then shrugged and stuffed a small bite into his mouth. Lily giggled, and for the first time, Michael felt something shift. A fleeting sense of warmth that seemed so foreign in his cold, polished world. "Did Mama ever tell you about us?" Emma's voice cut through the silence. Her gaze was steady, but there was something vulnerable beneath it. Michael set his fork down. "No," he admitted. "I didn't know about you until now." Emma's brow furrowed, and she seemed to weigh his words before responding. "She said you were important, that you had more important things to do than be with us." Michael stiffened. Important things. Was that how Sarah had explained his absence? That he had been too busy, too successful to care about them? The realization stung more than he cared to admit. "I was wrong," Michael said quietly, his voice steady. "I didn't know about you, and I wasn't there when I should have been. But I'm here now." Emma looked unconvinced, but before she could respond, the sound of glass shattering echoed through the penthouse. The room froze. Michael's head snapped up. "Stay here," he ordered, rising to his feet. Emma grabbed Ethan's hand, pulling him closer as Michael strode into the hallway. The sharp sound had come from the main living area, where the floor-to-ceiling windows overlooked the city skyline. When he arrived, his pulse quickened. A large brick sat in the middle of the room, surrounded by shards of broken glass. Taped to it was a note. Michael crouched down carefully, his fingers trembling as he tore the paper from the brick. The handwriting was jagged and scrawled, the message chilling. You should have left well enough alone. They don't belong to you. Neither did she. Michael's blood ran cold. He straightened, scanning the room, his heart pounding. Someone had been watching them, watching the children. Elena! Michael barked, summoning his housekeeper. She appeared moments later, her eyes wide in alarm. Sir, take the children to their rooms, Michael said, his voice deadly calm. Lock the doors and don't let anyone in. What happened? She asked nervously. Just do it, Michael snapped, his gaze hardening. Elena scurried off, calling for the kids. Michael reached for his phone, dialing Charles. The line connected immediately. Charles, I need a security team at the penthouse now, Michael ordered. Someone just broke in, or worse, they wanted me to know they could. The security team swept the penthouse, confirming what Michael already knew. The intruder was gone, leaving nothing behind but the brick and the note. They're trying to scare you, Charles said, his face grim as he stood beside Michael in the broken living room. It's working, Michael muttered, his voice laced with anger. Whoever did this knows about the children. They know about Sarah. Charles hesitated before speaking. Do you think it's connected to Sarah's past? Michael turned sharply. What do you mean, Sarah's past? Charles sighed, running a hand through his graying hair. I didn't want to mention it earlier, but Sarah wasn't exactly living a quiet life. After she left you, she disappeared for years, only to resurface with 4 kids and a lot of unanswered questions. She was struggling, Michael, financially and otherwise. Rumor has it she was involved with someone dangerous before she passed. Michael's chest tightened. Who? I don't know yet, Charles admitted, but I'll find out. Michael turned back to the shattered window, his fists clenching at his sides. Someone out there knew far too much about his family, and now they had crossed a line. That night, after the security team patched up the broken window and reinforced the penthouse, Michael sat outside the children's rooms, watching the hallway like a hawk. He refused to sleep, his mind racing as he pieced together the puzzle. Emma's voice broke the silence. Are we in danger? Michael turned to see her standing in the doorway, clutching the hem of her oversized t-shirt. She looked smaller than usual, the bravado she wore like armor cracking. No, Michael said, rising to his feet. Not while you're here. Emma studied him for a long moment before speaking. Are you sure you want us? The question hit him like a gut punch. Why would you ask that? Emma glanced down the hall, toward her sleeping siblings. Because everyone leaves us eventually. Michael crouched in front of her, his voice soft but firm. I'm not going to leave you, I promise. Emma searched his face, as though looking for a lie. Finally, she gave a small nod. Okay. As she disappeared back into her room, Michael felt a surge of determination unlike anything he had known before. Whoever was threatening these kids, his kids, would regret it. The early morning sky above Manhattan was a dull gray, mirroring the unease that settled deep in Michael Lancaster's chest. He stood by the window of his penthouse, coffee cooling in his hand, his gaze fixed on the skyline. In the days since the brick and the chilling note, his world had shifted on its axis. He was no longer just Michael Lancaster, the untouchable businessman, the invincible tycoon. Now he was a father, and someone out there wanted his children. Behind him, the penthouse was eerily quiet. Security personnel stationed outside ensured no one could get in or out without being noticed. But the sense of safety Michael had once found in this fortress of glass and steel was gone. Who was watching them? Who had sent the note? And what did they want? Michael's phone buzzed on the dining table. It was Charles. Tell me you have something, Michael said, his voice clipped. I do, Charles replied. But you're not going to like it. Michael exhaled sharply. Go on. We dug into Sarah's life after she left you. She was struggling, sure, but there's more to it. Before she passed, she was in trouble. Deep trouble, with a man named Victor Reyes. Michael's grip tightened around his coffee cup. Reyes? Yeah, small time at first, but over the past decade, he's turned into something dangerous. Blackmail, extortion, underground dealings, you name it. Sarah owed him money, a lot of it. From what I've pieced together, she borrowed to keep herself and the kids afloat after she got sick. She couldn't pay him back. Michael swore under his breath, his heart pounding. You think Reyes is the one behind this? The note. I'd bet on it, Charles said grimly. He probably thinks those kids are leverage. Maybe he figures they're worth something to you now that you've found them. Michael's free hand curled into a fist. Where is Reyes? He keeps his business out of a warehouse in Brooklyn. But listen, Michael, this guy isn't someone you just confront. He's dangerous, and desperate men like him don't play fair. I don't care, Michael said, his voice icy. Find out everything you can about him. I'll deal with Reyes myself. But Michael hung up, his mind already made up. Later that afternoon, Michael found the children in the living room. Jacob and Lily were on the floor, playing with a set of wooden building blocks, while Ethan sat silently in the corner, drawing with a set of colored pencils. Emma stood at the window, her arms crossed tightly over her chest, her expression distant. Michael approached her cautiously. You okay? Emma didn't look at him. Are we safe here? Yes, he replied firmly. You're lying, she said flatly, turning to face him. I can see it in your eyes. Michael sighed, running a hand through his hair. I'm not going to let anything happen to you. That's a promise. Emma studied him, her gaze sharp. You don't know how to be a dad, do you? The question stung, but Michael nodded slowly. No, I don't, but I'm trying. She looked away again, her voice quieter. Mama said we could trust you. Michael's chest tightened. She was right. That night, while the children slept, Michael sat in his office, staring at the security monitors that showed every entrance of the penthouse. The silence was heavy, oppressive. Then, without warning, the power went out. The monitors flickered to black. Michael shot to his feet, his pulse pounding. What the hell? The emergency lights flickered to life, casting the penthouse in a dim, orange glow. Michael grabbed his phone and dialed Charles, but the line was dead. Someone had cut the power. He raced down the hallway toward the children's rooms, his heart in his throat. When he reached the door to Jacob and Lily's room, he froze. The door was ajar. Jacob? Lily? Michael's voice was tight with panic as he stepped inside. The room was empty. The bed covers were rumpled, the window slightly open. A chill ran through him as he crossed to the window, peering down at the darkened street below. They were gone. Michael tore through the penthouse, his movements frantic as he checked each room. Emma and Ethan were safe, terrified but safe. Where are Jacob and Lily? Emma demanded, her voice shaking as she clutched Ethan's hand. Michael crouched in front of them, forcing himself to stay calm. Listen to me. I'm going to find them and bring them back. I promise. Tears welled in Emma's eyes, but she nodded, holding her brother close as Michael rose to his feet. He called Charles again, relief flooding him when the line connected. Charles, someone took Jacob and Lily. Slow down, Charles said, his voice urgent. Who? I don't know. The power was cut. I need you to track every security camera within a 10-block radius. Find them, Charles. I'm on it, Charles said. But, Michael, if this is Reyes, you need to be careful. Michael's jaw tightened. Careful won't bring them back. Hours later, Michael stood outside a dilapidated warehouse in Brooklyn, his fists clenched at his sides. Charles had traced a black SUV, one matching the description of the vehicle seen outside his building, to this location. Inside, the warehouse was dark, the air thick with the smell of oil and rust. Michael moved cautiously through the shadows, every muscle in his body coiled tight. He could hear faint voices coming from the far end of the building. When he rounded a corner, he froze. Victor Reyes stood in the center of the room, his back to Michael. Jacob and Lily sat nearby, huddled together on an old mattress, their faces streaked with tears. Let them go, Michael said, his voice low and deadly. Reyes turned slowly, a smirk spreading across his scarred face. Well, Michael Lancaster, the man who has it all. Michael stepped forward, his fists clenched. What do you want? Reyes spread his arms wide, as though the answer were obvious. Money, of course. A man like you can afford to make problems go away. Can't he? Michael's eyes darted to the children. They're just kids. They've got nothing to do with this. Reyes chuckled. Oh, but they do. They're leverage, Lancaster. Insurance. You want them back? Then you'll pay me what Sarah owed, and then some. Michael's teeth clenched. You're not walking away from this. Reyes's smile faded, his voice dropping to a growl. Neither are you. Suddenly, two men stepped out from the shadows, their faces obscured by ski masks. One of them brandished a gun, and Michael's pulse spiked. Take him, Reyes ordered. The room exploded into chaos. Michael lunged forward, using his height and strength to his advantage as he tackled the first man to the ground. The gun clattered across the concrete floor. Michael barely had time to react as the second man grabbed him from behind, but adrenaline surged through him, and he threw a vicious elbow, sending the attacker sprawling. Reyes cursed, grabbing a knife from a nearby table. You think you can stop me, Lancaster? Michael advanced on him, his voice a snarl. You have no idea what I'm capable of. Reyes lunged, but Michael sidestepped, grabbing his wrist and twisting it hard until the knife fell from his hand. Reyes cried out in pain, but Michael ignored him, his focus on the children. Jacob! Lily! He shouted. Come here. The twins scrambled to their feet, running toward him as tears streamed down their faces. Michael scooped them into his arms, holding them close. It's okay, he murmured, his voice shaking. I've got you. You're safe now. Victor Reyes' mocking laughter echoed in Michael Lancaster's mind long after he had escaped the warehouse with Jacob and Lily. The children were safe for now, but Michael knew Reyes wasn't finished. He was a man who thrived on control, and Michael had taken the one thing he wanted most. Leverage. Back at the penthouse, Michael held Jacob and Lily close as they finally succumbed to sleep, exhaustion overwhelming their fear. Emma sat nearby, her jaw clenched, her eyes rimmed with tears she refused to let fall. Ethan was silent, sitting cross-legged in the corner, his drawing pad untouched for the first time in days. Did you get him? Emma finally asked, her voice breaking the heavy silence. Michael shook his head, his fists tightening. No, but I will. Her gaze burned with a mixture of anger and desperation. What if he comes back? What if he takes us again? Michael crouched down in front of her, his hands resting on her shoulders. No one is taking you again, I promise. Emma hesitated, searching his face for any hint of weakness. When she found none, she nodded. The next morning, Charles arrived with news that turned Michael's world upside down. Reyes isn't just holding on to some grudge, Charles said, pacing the penthouse office. He's got a reason to believe those kids are more valuable than you realize. Michael frowned, leaning forward in his chair. What do you mean? Charles hesitated. It's Sarah. Her death. It wasn't just a coincidence. Michael's blood ran cold. Explain. Sarah wasn't just running from Reyes for money. She knew something about his operation. Something big. There are whispers that she had proof, documents, recordings, something incriminating. Reyes thinks you have it now, or that the kids know where it is. Michael stood abruptly, his hands gripping the desk. Why didn't she tell me this? She probably didn't want to involve you, Charles replied. But now you are involved, whether you like it or not. And Reyes won't stop until he gets what he thinks Sarah left behind. Michael turned to the window, his reflection glaring back at him. He had been so focused on protecting the children, he hadn't thought to dig deeper into Sarah's death. What secrets had she taken to her grave? That evening, Michael searched Sarah's belongings, which he had taken from the children's meager possessions. Among the threadbare clothes and a few family photos, he found an envelope hidden inside a worn-out book. It contained a handwritten letter addressed to him. Michael, if you're reading this, then something has happened to me. I never wanted you to know about this life, about the danger I brought into our children's world, but I had no choice. Reyes is after me because of what I uncovered about his operation. He's not just a criminal. He's a monster, and I made the mistake of crossing him. I thought I could protect the kids on my own, but if you found this, I've failed. The proof Reyes wants is hidden where our story began. If you want to protect the children, you'll have to finish what I started. I'm sorry I couldn't do it myself. Take care of them, Michael. Be the father they deserve. Sarah ***. Michael's hands trembled as he reread the final lines, where our story began. It was cryptic, but Michael knew what it meant. The small apartment they had shared all those years ago. The place where Sarah had first told him she loved him. Michael arrived at the old apartment building late that night, his heart pounding as he climbed the narrow staircase. The place had changed little in the years since he had last seen it. Peeling wallpaper, the faint smell of mildew, and the creak of every step brought memories rushing back. In the apartment's bedroom, Michael found a loose floorboard beneath the old radiator. Beneath it was a small metal box. Inside, he found USB drives, photographs, and a notebook filled with Sarah's meticulous handwriting. As he flipped through the pages, the magnitude of what she had uncovered became clear. Reyes wasn't just running an extortion racket. He was laundering money for international crime syndicates and using human trafficking to fund his operations. The proof was damning, enough to put Reyes away for life and expose his entire network. When Michael returned to the penthouse, Charles was waiting with news. "We've got a lead on Reyes," Charles said. "He's holed up in a safe house outside the city. But he knows you're onto him. If you're going to act, it has to be now." Michael glanced at the sleeping children in the living room, his resolve hardening. "Then we act now." The raid on Reyes' safe house was swift and brutal. Michael didn't go alone. He brought a team of private security experts, backed by a federal agent Charles had secretly contacted. The evidence Michael carried was enough to justify immediate action, and Reyes, caught off guard, was no match for their precision. As Reyes was dragged out in handcuffs, his face contorted with rage. "You think this ends here, Lancaster? You have no idea what's coming for you." Michael stepped forward, his gaze cold and unyielding. "It ends when I say it does." Reyes was hauled into a waiting car, and for the first time in weeks, Michael felt a measure of relief. Back at the penthouse, the children were waiting anxiously when Michael returned. "Did you get him?" Emma asked, her voice trembling. Michael knelt down, pulling all four of them into a protective embrace. "He's gone," he said softly. "You're safe now." The tension in the room broke as Lily began to cry, clinging to his neck. Jacob followed, his small hands fisting in Michael's shirt. Even Ethan, usually so quiet and withdrawn, buried his face in Michael's shoulder. Emma pulled back slightly, her eyes glistening with tears. "Mama said you'd save us," she whispered. Michael's throat tightened. She was right. The following weeks brought a sense of peace Michael had never known. With Reyes gone and the children finally settling into their new lives, the penthouse no longer felt like an empty fortress. Felt like a home. One evening, as the children played together in the living room, Michael sat with Emma at the dining table, helping her with her homework. "You're different," she said suddenly, looking up at him. Michael raised an eyebrow. "Different how?" "You used to be scary," she said, a faint smile tugging at her lips. "But now you're just Dad." Michael's chest swelled with emotion. "I think I like that better." Emma grinned, and for the first time, Michael felt like he belonged. Not in the world of wealth and power he had built, but in the family he had found. Epilogue. Months later, Michael sat in a park with all four children, watching them chase each other through the grass. The ghosts of the past no longer loomed so large, and for the first time in years, Michael felt whole. He wasn't just a millionaire anymore. He was a father, and for the first time, he knew what it meant to truly live.